Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. Emily took a deep breath as she stood before the entrance to the first-class cabin. She had never flown this way before. Her entire life had been a careful balancing act of sacrifices and hard work, always striving for a life just beyond her reach. And now, here she was, standing in the doorway of luxury, a dream come true. The plush leather seats, the elegant lighting, the soft hum of the aircraft, it felt like she had finally made it. Today, everything was supposed to go perfectly. It was a reward for her years of striving, working 2 jobs, cutting back on every unnecessary expense, and always feeling the weight of financial struggles. But this wasn't just any flight. This was the flight that would take her to a life-changing business conference in Paris, the one she had been preparing for in silence for the last year. Everything hinged on this. Emily adjusted the fabric of her navy blue dress, a simple but elegant choice. She had tried to look the part. Her makeup was light but flawless, her hair styled neatly. She had planned everything, down to the perfect red lipstick that added just the right touch of confidence. She was proud of herself, proud that she could afford this ticket despite the odds stacked against her. But as she stepped into the first-class section, all of that confidence began to slip away. The flight attendants, who had been smiling brightly at every other passenger, suddenly fell silent as they saw her. It wasn't that she was unkempt, but she didn't belong. Emily knew at the moment she stepped into the cabin. Her outfit was professional, yes, but the way she carried herself couldn't hide the small, simple things about her life. She wasn't like the other passengers in designer clothes and expensive accessories. Her shoes were well worn but polished, and the bag slung over her shoulder was practical, not luxurious. She hesitated at her assigned seat, but as she walked down the aisle, it was impossible to ignore the stares. Whispers rippled through the first-class passengers as they glanced over at her, their expressions unreadable. Was it pity? Disdain? Disbelief? One of the flight attendants, a tall woman with bright blue eyes, approached her. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said, her voice polite but distant. "There seems to be a mistake with your seat. This is a first-class section, and your ticket isn't valid here." Emily felt a surge of confusion. "What do you mean? My ticket's first class." It was confirmed. "I've paid for this seat," she said, trying to maintain her composure. She didn't understand. Her heart began to race, and the blood drained from her face as the reality of the situation hit her. The flight attendant smiled stiffly, then turned to the man seated across the aisle, who had been watching the exchange with interest. He was well-dressed, older, with graying hair and an air of quiet authority. He looked up at her with a gaze that seemed almost pitying. "I'm afraid this is not the right place for you, ma'am," the flight attendant continued, ignoring Emily's confusion. "You need to return to the economy section." Emily's mouth went dry. She had worked so hard for this moment, had sacrificed so much to sit in that seat. She had earned it. Why was she being treated like this? The anger bubbled inside her, but she fought it down. "Stay calm," she told herself. "There must be some kind of mistake." "I'm sorry, but I have a first-class ticket," she said, her voice trembling slightly. The flight attendant didn't even look at the ticket. "You don't belong here," she said, her words flat and final. "Please, return to the back of the plane." Emily's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to scream. This wasn't just a mistake, it was an affront to everything she had worked for. But she knew she couldn't make a scene. She could feel the eyes of the other passengers on her, their judgment weighing down on her like a heavy cloak. As she turned to leave, she heard the murmurs and chuckles behind her. "Look at her," some of them seemed to say. "She doesn't belong here." She could almost hear their thoughts. Why would someone like her be in first class? Her hands shook as she walked away, and the tears threatened to fall, but she forced them back. This wasn't the end. She had come this far, she wasn't going to let these people, their prejudice, or their assumptions ruin her journey. Just as she reached the door to the cabin, she felt a hand on her shoulder. "Ma'am, if I may speak with you for a moment," a voice said from behind her. She turned, and standing there was a man, tall, well-dressed, with an air of quiet authority. His sharp suit, perfectly tailored, contrasted with the flight attendants' uniforms. His expression was one of calm but firm resolve. "I'm sorry, but this situation is unacceptable," he said, his voice calm but with an undeniable edge of authority. "Please, follow me." Emily blinked, taken aback. Who was this? Why was he helping me? The flight attendants looked up at the man, their expressions uneasy. "Is there a problem, sir?" the tall attendant asked, her voice uncertain. "I'm handling this," he replied simply. Without waiting for a response, he turned to Emily and gestured toward the back of the plane. "Come with me, please," he said, and with no further hesitation, he led her down the aisle. Emily was too stunned to speak. She had no idea who this man was, but his presence seemed to shift the entire atmosphere in the cabin. The whispers quieted, and even the flight attendants' stern faces softened, just for a moment. He led her to a small, private cabin near the back of the plane. It was spacious but not ostentatious. There was a table with coffee cups, a few leather chairs, and large windows that overlooked the clouds below. The man closed the door behind them and turned to Emily. "First of all," he began, his tone now gentler, "I want to apologize for what happened back there. You should never have been treated like that. What happened was completely unacceptable." Emily blinked, her confusion deepening. "But, why? I don't understand. I had a valid first-class ticket. Why would they do that?" The man's eyes softened. "It's not just about the ticket, Emily," he said. His voice was steady, but his gaze held something more, something Emily couldn't quite place. "It's about how they see you." Her breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" Before he could respond, the flight attendant from earlier appeared in the doorway. "Sir, we've handled it," she said quickly, but the man didn't seem to hear her. He was still focused on Emily, his attention unwavering. "There's something you don't know," he said quietly. "Something that will explain everything." Emily's mind raced. What could he possibly be talking about? He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small card. "You see, Emily," he said, holding it out to her, "you didn't just sit in the wrong seat. You belong here. In fact, you own this airline." Emily stood frozen, staring at the man who had just dropped a bombshell in front of her. The words "you own this airline" echoed in her mind, a strange combination of disbelief and confusion flooding her senses. Her eyes widened as she looked at him, unsure if she had heard him correctly. "Own this airline?" The man didn't seem to notice her stunned silence. He was watching her intently, as if he was waiting for a reaction. His hands were folded in front of him, his stance calm and collected. The entire atmosphere had shifted in the span of a few seconds, from the cold, judgmental rejection she had faced earlier, to this moment of overwhelming uncertainty. What are you talking about?" Emily finally managed to stammer, her voice shaky. She wanted to laugh, to dismiss what he said as some kind of bizarre joke. But nothing about this felt like a joke. The man didn't smile, but his expression softened. "I know this is hard to believe, but I assure you, it's the truth." He paused and then added, "Let me explain." He sat down in one of the leather chairs and gestured for Emily to do the same. She hesitated, still trying to process what was happening. Was she dreaming? How could this be possible? But there was a strange calmness about him, and the seriousness in his eyes made her realize that he wasn't lying. Taking a seat across from him, she found herself gripping the edge of the chair, trying to steady her racing thoughts. What was going on? He continued, his voice even but tinged with a sense of urgency. "My name is Victor Gray. I've been working for your family for years, though you probably don't know that. Emily's brow furrowed. Family? She had no family that was involved in airlines. At least, none that she knew of. Her parents had both passed away when she was young, and she had been raised by distant relatives who were far removed from anything remotely close to wealth or business. Victor Gray, she repeated, the name unfamiliar to her. I don't know you. And I definitely don't know about any family business. What are you talking about? Victor's face remained calm. I understand that this must be overwhelming for you. But your mother, Emily, she was one of the largest shareholders of this airline. When she passed, her shares were passed down to you. Her mind swirled, trying to grasp what he was saying. Shares? Airline? She didn't know anything about this. She had been living her life working as a marketing coordinator, a far cry from anything resembling the ownership of a major airline. I don't, she started, but Victor raised a hand to stop her. I know this must sound impossible, but it's all documented. You were too young when everything was arranged, and your guardians never mentioned it to you. They kept it from you. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Her chest tightened, and a strange sensation washed over her. Why didn't they tell me? Why would they keep this from me? Victor leaned forward, his expression darkening. Your family has always been protective. They didn't want you to be burdened by this. They didn't want you to know about your inheritance, about the responsibilities that came with it. But now, it's time for you to take control. The weight of his words sank in slowly, like a heavy anchor pulling her deeper into the depths of a strange, new reality. She felt lightheaded, as if the ground beneath her feet was shifting. Her mind raced with questions. What responsibilities? What inheritance? Victor continued, his voice steady. You've been under a different impression of your life, Emily. You've worked hard, and I admire that. But you've been living in the shadows of a legacy you never knew about. And now, it's time for you to claim it. Emily shook her head, still unable to comprehend. How could this be true? She had been a working-class girl all her life, never imagining that anything other than struggle awaited her. And now, suddenly, she was the heir to an airline? The idea seemed impossible. Are you saying, she started, her voice trembling, that I own an entire airline? Victor nodded slowly. Yes. You own the majority of the shares in this airline. And you've inherited not just the company, but a legacy that has been hidden from you. Emily's hands gripped the arms of the chair, her knuckles turning white. She could feel her pulse pounding in her temples. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But why me? She whispered. Why would my family do this? Why would they hide something so big from me? Victor leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Your family wanted to protect you. They didn't want you to grow up with the pressures of a legacy. They believed you should live a normal life, without the complications of wealth and power. But you've always been part of this world, even if you didn't know it. Emily felt a mixture of anger, confusion, and disbelief swirling inside her. Protect me? How could they protect her from something like this? She had always been proud of the life she had built on her own, of the struggles she had overcome. But now, it felt like her entire reality had been flipped upside down. I don't know what to say, she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. Victor paused, allowing the silence to stretch between them. Finally, he spoke again, his tone softer. I understand. This is a lot to process. But now that you know, you have to make a decision. You have to take control of the company, and that means stepping into a world that's far different from the one you've known. Emily's mind was spinning. Take control of the company? She felt completely out of her depth. How could she run an airline? She had no experience, no training for something like this. She was just a woman who had worked hard to get by, who had never imagined anything beyond a regular paycheck and a simple life. Victor's voice broke through her thoughts. There's more. There are others who are aware of your inheritance, people who will want to take advantage of it, to control it. The only way to ensure the future of the airline, and your place in it, is to step up now. The gravity of his words hit her like a ton of bricks. Others? Her breath caught in her throat. She hadn't even begun to comprehend the implications of what Victor was saying. People want to control this? Her inheritance was already a source of conflict, a thing to be fought over? Victor stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the clouds below. This is just the beginning, Emily. Your life is about to change in ways you can't even imagine. But you have the power to shape that change. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She felt both empowered and terrified. What if I can't do it? She thought. What if I fail? Victor turned back to her. You're not alone in this. I'll help you, but only if you're ready to take charge. She looked at him, uncertainty written all over her face. This wasn't just about a ticket to Paris anymore. This wasn't just about luxury or business conferences. This was about a world that was about to open up to her, a world that she had never known, never imagined, and yet somehow, she was now a part of it. What do I do now? She asked, her voice shaky but determined. Victor's gaze softened. Now, you take the first step. You claim your inheritance, and you decide what kind of future you want. But remember, the path you choose will change everything. The plane hummed steadily as it soared through the clouds, a gentle reminder of the luxury that surrounded Emily. But all she could focus on was the whirlwind of emotions churning inside her. She had just learned that she was the heir to an airline, something she never could have imagined in her wildest dreams. The truth was both exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. How could something so monumental have been hidden from her for so long? And why now? As the minutes ticked by in the small private cabin, Emily's mind was filled with questions she couldn't answer. She looked out the window, the vast expanse of the sky stretching endlessly before her. It was beautiful, but it felt distant. Far removed from the life she had known just hours before Victor had walked into her world and turned everything upside down. Victor, who had been standing by the window, finally turned around and looked at her. Emily, he said, his voice low and measured. I know this is a lot to process, but you need to understand something. The people who run this airline, the people who have been managing it behind the scenes, they're not just employees. They're power players, and some of them might not want you here. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Power players? She had no idea what he meant. She had only ever thought of business in the most basic sense, corporations, investments, salaries, but this felt like something more sinister. Victor continued, his gaze intense. The shares you inherited are worth billions. And that power comes with a target on your back. There are people who will stop at nothing to control it. To control you. A cold shiver ran down Emily's spine. She wasn't just dealing with paperwork, legal documents, and financial reports. She was about to step into a world of corporate warfare, power struggles, and manipulation. She had no idea how to navigate this world. She was just a woman who had fought for everything she had on her own. Now, she was expected to become something she wasn't prepared to be, a leader in a company she didn't understand. I can't just walk into this and take control, Emily said, her voice cracking. I don't even know the first thing about running an airline, about managing billions of dollars. Victor's expression softened, but there was still a hardness in his eyes. You don't need to know everything right away. What you need is courage. And the willingness to fight for what's yours. You've been given something that most people can't even dream of. But that comes with a responsibility. A responsibility to protect it, to shape it. Emily looked at him, struggling to process his words. But why me? She whispered. Why not someone else? Someone who has experience. I don't belong here. I'm just. You are the rightful heir, Victor interjected, his voice cutting through her uncertainty. That's why it has to be you. Your family believed you could handle it. And I believe you can too. She looked down at her hands, the weight of the ring on her finger suddenly feeling like a symbol of everything she didn't know how to handle. Her inheritance. Her responsibility. Her destiny. The silence between them stretched out before her, the heavy truth settling in. She was meant to lead. To fight. To protect something that was not just a company, but a legacy. A legacy that had been passed down to her without her ever knowing it. What if I fail, she asked, the fear creeping into her voice. What if I can't do this? Victor paused for a moment, his eyes searching hers. Everyone is afraid of failing, Emily. But it's not about the failure. It's about what you do after. The choices you make when things get hard. That's what defines a leader. His words felt like both a challenge and a warning. Emily felt the weight of them on her shoulders. This wasn't just about learning the ins and outs of the airline business. It was about surviving a world that she wasn't prepared for, a world where people would lie, cheat, and betray to get what they wanted. I'm not ready for this, Emily whispered, more to herself than to him. Victor stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. No one ever is, at first. But you have me. You have the resources to learn, to grow into this role. And you have something far more powerful than all the money in the world, the truth. The truth. Emily's mind reeled as she thought about that. What was the truth? Was it that she had been kept in the dark about her inheritance all these years? Was it that she had been shielded from a world she had no idea existed? Or was it something deeper, a truth about herself that she had yet to uncover? Now, Victor continued, we need to prepare you for what's coming next. There are meetings, decisions, and people you'll need to face. People who are already trying to make their move. They think you're weak, that you don't know what you're doing. And that makes you vulnerable. Emily clenched her fists, determination building inside her. What do I need to do? Victor smiled, a hint of approval in his eyes. First, you need to understand who the players are. And you need to know your enemy. He handed her a folder, thick with documents and reports. These are the key stakeholders. People who have been with the airline for years. Some of them are loyal, but others are waiting for a chance to take control. You need to know who you can trust and who you need to watch out for. Emily flipped open the folder, scanning the names and profiles of several high-ranking executives and investors. As she read, she felt a growing sense of unease. These weren't just business people. They were sharks, powerful individuals with decades of experience in the corporate world. People who would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. One name stood out to her, Gregory Westbrook. The chairman of the board. She had heard of him before, a name that was always associated with success. But there was something about his face in the photo, something cold and calculating that sent a shiver down her spine. Victor noticed her hesitation and leaned in closer. Gregory Westbrook is the one you need to be most careful with. He's the most dangerous. He's been trying to push you out of the picture for years. He believes the airline should be in his hands, not yours. Emily swallowed hard. Why? Because he knows the value of power. He wants to control everything. And now that you've inherited the majority of shares, he sees you as an obstacle. He'll try to manipulate you, to make you doubt yourself. He'll try to divide and conquer. Emily felt her stomach churn. Gregory Westbrook. The enemy. The man who was already trying to strip her of her birthright before she even understood it. I won't let him, Emily said, the word surprising even her. A fire had ignited within her, a fire she hadn't realized was there. Victor nodded, his eyes gleaming with approval. That's the spirit. But be careful. Trust no one completely. And always remember, business is war. It's not personal. It's about survival. Emily's mind raced as she thought about the battle ahead. She was walking into a storm she hadn't been prepared for, but she would face it. She would learn, adapt, and survive. And somehow, she would find a way to win. As the plane continued its journey, Emily stared out the window, her thoughts swirling. Her life had already changed in ways she couldn't comprehend. And now, there was no going back. The sound of the jet's engines hummed in the background, a constant reminder of the world moving on outside while Emily sat in her private cabin, consumed by everything that had happened in the past few days. The documents Victor had given her lay open in front of her, but she hadn't been able to focus on them for long. The names and figures blurred together as her mind kept drifting to the reality she was now facing, a reality where she was no longer just Emily from a small town, she was Emily, the owner of an airline, with billions at her fingertips and the weight of the world's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Victor had left her alone to think, knowing the gravity of the situation. The calm expression on his face earlier had been reassuring, but Emily knew that beneath it was a storm of strategic decisions that would affect her life forever. Business is war, he had said. And now, the war was hers to fight. The jet began its descent toward Paris, and Emily snapped out of her thoughts, trying to regain some semblance of control. She had never imagined herself in this position. But now that she was here, she knew she had to be strong, stronger than she had ever been in her life. The world was watching, and the people she would soon meet weren't going to pull any punches. As the plane touched down on the tarmac, Emily felt the familiar rush of excitement mixed with fear. This was the place where it would all start. The business conference she had been planning for months would now be the backdrop for a battle far more complex than any presentation or pitch she had prepared for. Her footsteps echoed in the sterile, impersonal hallways of the airport as she made her way to the car that would take her to the venue. She had one goal in mind: to understand her position. To figure out who her allies were, who her enemies were, and how she could use every piece of information to her advantage. But as she stepped into the sleek black car, she realized that there was one thing she had yet to face: herself. The car's tires hummed against the pavement as they sped through the busy streets of Paris, the Eiffel Tower looming in the distance. Emily stared out the window, lost in thought. Her reflection in the glass seemed like a stranger. She didn't recognize the woman who had been thrust into this world of high-stakes business and power plays. Was she capable of this? Of standing tall in the face of powerful people who had been in control of everything for so long? Could she lead an airline, let alone protect her inheritance from those who wanted to steal it from her? The questions swirled in her mind, but deep down, she knew there was no going back. This was her life now. She had to face the future with all the courage she could muster. And that meant playing the game by their rules, even if she wasn't entirely sure what those rules were. The conference was held in one of Paris's most exclusive venues, a sprawling hotel with grand chandeliers and crystal-clear marble floors. The attendees were a who's who of the business world: CEOs, investors, and decision-makers who had the power to shape the future of industries. And they were all here to meet Emily. Victor had briefed her on the importance of this event. This was her opportunity to introduce herself to the movers and shakers of the business world, to establish her presence, and to take her first steps as the head of the airline. But there was more at stake than just networking. It was here that she would begin to learn who could be trusted and who was already scheming to undermine her. As she stepped into the grand ballroom, Emily felt her stomach tighten. The lights were dazzling, the air thick with the scent of expensive cologne and the soft murmur of conversation. She was greeted with polite smiles and handshakes, but she could feel the tension in the air. There were eyes on her, scrutinizing her every move, trying to figure out if she was truly worthy of her inheritance or if she was just an imposter. Her first interaction was with a man she had heard of before, Damien Lefebvre, the the CEO of a rival airline. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with a sharp jawline and a calculating gaze. When he extended his hand to shake hers, she noticed the slight smile playing on his lips, as if he already knew the game he was about to play. "Ms. Blackwood," he said smoothly, his voice laced with an accent that made every word sound deliberate. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." "Mr. Lefevre," Emily replied, trying to mask the nervousness in her voice. "The pleasure is mine." He leaned in slightly, his eyes never leaving hers. "I must admit, I was surprised to hear of your sudden ascension to power. It's not every day that someone like you takes the reins of such a prestigious company." The words felt like a veiled challenge, and Emily's instincts told her that this was a man who smelled weakness from miles away. She could almost hear him thinking, "She's not cut out for this. I'll take her down, just like everyone else before her." But she wouldn't let him see her uncertainty. She couldn't afford to. She smiled back, her posture straight, her voice calm. "I suppose it's a surprise to everyone, Mr. Lefevre. But I'm here to stay." Damien's smile never wavered, but there was something cold in his eyes, something calculating. He leaned back slightly, appraising her. "We'll see about that," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She had made her first enemy, and she wasn't even sure how to defend herself. The rest of the evening unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance. There were more introductions, more handshakes, and polite conversation, but each moment left her feeling more isolated. She wasn't used to this world, this game of power and prestige. She was used to working for her paycheck, not inheriting a fortune. And every time someone looked at her with skepticism or curiosity, she felt like an imposter, a fraud who didn't belong. But she wasn't going to give up. She couldn't afford to. As the night wore on, Emily found herself in a quieter corner of the ballroom, nursing a glass of wine and trying to compose her thoughts. The weight of the responsibility was crushing, and she knew that she needed help. She needed someone who understood the world she had been thrust into, someone who could guide her through the intricacies of corporate strategy and power dynamics. And then, as if by fate, she saw him. Victor. He stood across the room, talking with a small group of executives, his calm demeanor making him seem like a pillar of strength amidst the chaos of the evening. He saw her standing there, and his eyes met hers for a brief moment. Without a word, he excused himself from the group and made his way toward her. "I thought you might need a break," he said with a smile, his tone gentle but knowing. Emily let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I don't know if I can do this, Victor," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel like I'm out of my depth." Victor's expression softened. "You're not alone, Emily. You've got everything it takes. You just need to believe it. You've already made your first move by being here. Now, it's time to play the game." She looked at him, her heart heavy with doubt. "But what if I lose?" "You won't lose," he said firmly. "Not if you make the right moves. But you have to be prepared. You have to be ruthless when the time comes. You can't show weakness." She nodded slowly, his words sinking in. Ruthless. She hadn't thought about it that way. But the world she had entered wasn't forgiving. She was learning that the hard way. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For being here. For believing in me." Victor smiled. "That's what I'm here for." As the evening drew to a close, Emily felt a newfound resolve growing inside her. She wasn't just a passenger in this world anymore. She was a player, whether she liked it or not. And she would play by the rules, learn the strategies, and make the moves that would protect her legacy and secure her place in this world. The night had been just the beginning. The real battle was only starting. The sun was setting over the city of Paris as Emily stood on the balcony of her suite, looking out at the sprawling city below. The soft golden light bathed the skyline in hues of amber and pink, and for a brief moment, everything felt calm. The chaos of the conference, the game of power she had been thrust into, seemed a world away. But she knew that peace was fleeting. Beneath the surface of the luxurious hotel, the vast network of corporate sharks and power players was waiting for the next move. Every decision she made, every word she spoke, was scrutinized, analyzed, and weighed against her rivals. The weight of it all had become unbearable, and despite the beauty of the city around her, Emily felt more isolated than ever. She had never imagined herself in a position like this. She had always been content with her simple life, with the comfort of knowing who she was and where she stood. But now, she was being pushed into a world of manipulation, betrayal, and ruthless ambition. And then there was Gregory Westbrook, the man who had made it clear from the beginning that he would stop at nothing to take what was hers. He was patient, calculating, and he knew exactly how to play the game. Every conversation with him left her feeling uneasy, as though he could see through her, into the very core of her doubts and fears. The moment he had spoken to her at the conference, Emily had realized that this wasn't just about business, it was personal. He didn't just want the airline for its wealth and power. He wanted to break her, to expose her as unfit to lead. Victor had warned her about Gregory, had told her to be prepared for the worst. But nothing had prepared her for the cold, unrelenting way he had tried to manipulate her, to make her question her own worth. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Emily turned, surprised. She wasn't expecting anyone. "Come in," she called. Victor entered, his expression more serious than usual. He closed the door behind him and stood in the center of the room, his eyes fixed on hers. "You look troubled," he observed, his voice calm but with a note of concern. "I am," Emily replied softly, turning back to the window. "I'm not sure I can do this. I feel like I'm drowning in this world. Every move I make, every decision, is met with resistance. I'm not cut out for this, Victor. I'm not a leader." Victor walked over to her, standing a few feet away. "You've already proven that you are," he said gently. "You're here, aren't you? You've made it this far, despite everything." Emily shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "But it's not enough. I'm not ready. I don't know what I'm doing. And every time I try to take control, someone like Gregory is there, pushing me down." Victor's expression hardened. "Gregory Westbrook is a dangerous man. He knows how to play people like you and me. He sees weakness and he exploits it. But you have something he doesn't. You have the truth on your side. You have the legacy. And you're not alone in this." "I feel alone," Emily admitted, her voice cracking. "I don't know who to trust anymore. I don't know what to believe. All I've known is that I have to fight, but I don't know how to win." Victor's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her. "You don't have to do this alone, Emily. I'm here. And there are others who support you. You just have to be willing to accept help." Emily took a deep breath, her emotions bubbling to the surface. "But what if I fail? What if I'm not enough?" "You are enough," Victor said firmly. "You are more than enough. But you need to believe in yourself. You need to stand tall and stop letting people like Gregory control your fear." The words hung in the air, and Emily felt something inside her shift. She had spent so long doubting herself, questioning whether she had the strength to face the challenges ahead. But maybe, just maybe, she had the power to turn the tide. She straightened her back and wiped the tears from her eyes. "I can't keep running. I have to face this." Victor smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "That's the Emily I know." The next morning, Emily was ready. She had made up her mind. She wasn't going to sit back and let Gregory or anyone else dictate her future. She was going to take control, not just of the company, but of her own destiny. The first step was the board meeting. Victor had told her that today would be pivotal. The members of the board would be making important decisions about the future of the airline, and Emily would be expected to make her presence known. Gregory would likely try to undermine her, to make her appear weak or unprepared. But this time, she wouldn't let him. As she entered the boardroom, Emily felt a surge of determination. The room was filled with familiar faces, the powerful executives who had been running the airline for years. But this time, she wasn't just another observer. She was the one in charge. Victor was by her side, as always, his calm presence giving her the strength she needed. She took a seat at the head of the table, the eyes of the board members on her. Gregory Westbrook was sitting across from her, his eyes locked onto hers, an almost predatory gleam in his gaze. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. He was already playing the game, already trying to figure out how to tear her down. The meeting began, and as the minutes passed, Emily listened closely. She asked questions, offered suggestions, and showed the board that she wasn't just a figurehead. She was prepared. She was sharp. And most importantly, she wasn't afraid to speak her mind. But then, as expected, Gregory made his move. "We're facing some serious financial challenges," he said smoothly, his voice calm but filled with an undercurrent of menace. "Perhaps it's time to consider a change in leadership. Someone with more experience, someone who understands the intricacies of the airline industry. Someone like me." His words hung in the air, and Emily could feel the weight of them. The board members were looking at her, waiting for her response. The pressure was on. She took a deep breath and met Gregory's gaze, refusing to look away. "I appreciate your input, Mr. Westbrook," she said evenly. "But I believe the airline's greatest strength lies in its ability to adapt. I've spent the last few weeks learning everything I can about this company. I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm here to lead." There was a brief silence as the room processed her words. Then, one by one, the board members began to nod, some with surprise, others with approval. Emily felt a small sense of victory, but she knew this was just the beginning. The real battle had only just begun. Gregory's expression remained unchanged, but Emily could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He wasn't used to being challenged. And he wasn't used to losing. The rest of the meeting continued without incident, but Emily knew that this was only the first of many confrontations she would face. The path ahead was still uncertain, filled with obstacles and dangers. But for the first time since learning the truth about her inheritance, Emily felt like she was ready to face whatever came next. As the meeting ended, Victor leaned in and whispered, "You did well." Emily smiled, feeling the weight of her newfound strength. This is just the beginning. The early morning sunlight poured through the expansive windows of Emily's office, casting a warm glow on the polished mahogany desk in front of her. The view of the city below, with its sprawling buildings and busy streets, seemed a world away from the whirlwind of emotions and challenges she had faced over the past few weeks. Her life had changed so dramatically in such a short amount of time that it was difficult to believe the woman staring back at her in the polished reflection was the same one who had walked into this world with nothing but doubt and uncertainty. But now, Emily Blackwood stood firm in her resolve. She was no longer just the heir to a billion-dollar airline, she was its leader. The weight of that responsibility had grown heavier with every passing day, but she had learned to bear it with grace and determination. The office was eerily quiet, save for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional rustle of papers as she reviewed the latest financial reports. She had spent the morning preparing for the final showdown with Gregory Westbrook, the man who had made it clear from the very beginning that he wouldn't stop until he controlled the airline. Gregory had made his final move yesterday, the kind of play that left no room for negotiation. He had orchestrated a private meeting with several key shareholders, people who had been with the company for years. Emily had overheard bits and pieces of the conversation, and from what she had gathered, they were preparing to vote her out. They believed she wasn't experienced enough, that she wasn't strong enough to lead the company through the turbulent times ahead. They were wrong. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she typed out a single, powerful message that would set the course for everything. The meeting that would determine the future of the airline was scheduled for noon today, and she wasn't going to let anyone take what was rightfully hers. The boardroom was packed when Emily arrived, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor as she entered. The faces of the board members, the key investors, and Gregory Westbrook himself were all fixed on her as she stepped confidently to the head of the table. There was no turning back now. Gregory's eyes narrowed as he saw her enter, but he didn't smile. His cold, calculating gaze was locked on her with the intensity of a predator. He knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment he would finally succeed in taking control of the airline. But Emily wasn't going to let him win. Not today. Not ever. She took her seat at the head of the table, her posture straight, her hands resting calmly on the surface in front of her. She glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of each person present. "I'm sure we all know why we're here," she began, her voice steady and commanding. "Today, we make the decision about the future of this airline. The shareholders will vote, and the board will make its recommendation. But I want to be clear, I will not step down. I will not allow anyone to take what's mine, what was left to me, without a fight." The room was silent for a long moment. The tension was palpable. The board members exchanged looks, murmuring amongst themselves. Emily could feel their uncertainty, their hesitation. They didn't know her, not really. They had only seen her as the inexperienced heir, the woman who had been thrust into a role she wasn't prepared for. But what they didn't understand was that she wasn't the woman they thought she was. She had learned. She had grown. And she was ready. Gregory, ever the opportunist, leaned forward in his chair. "Ms. Blackwood," he said, his voice smooth but laced with a barely contained smirk. "While I respect your resolve, the truth is that this company needs someone with experience, someone who can lead it through the difficult times ahead. I've been a part of this industry for decades. I know what it takes." "I don't need experience to know what it takes to lead," Emily replied, her eyes locking with his. "What I need is vision. What I need is a commitment to this company, to its future. I don't need someone like you, someone who sees this as nothing more than a power grab." Gregory's face darkened, but he remained calm. "You don't understand what you're up against, Emily. This isn't just about vision. It's about survival. The market is shifting, and the airline is facing financial pressures that require immediate action. You don't have the expertise to navigate these waters. I do. I've seen the financial reports, Gregory," Emily said evenly, her voice unwavering. "I know the challenges the company is facing. But the answer is not to sell out, to hand over control to someone who only sees profit. The answer is to innovate, to lead with integrity, and to make the hard decisions when they need to be made." She could see the doubt in some of the board members' eyes now. They had expected her to falter, to hesitate. They had expected her to give up and hand over control. But she wouldn't. She would never. Victor, who had been standing quietly to the side, now stepped forward. "Gregory," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you've been playing this game for years, but you've never faced anyone like Emily. She's not here to play by your rules. She's here to change the game." Gregory's eyes flicked toward Victor, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned to the board, his expression one of condescension. "We'll see, won't we?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Let's get this over with," he continued, "let's vote." Emily stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment had arrived. She was about to face the final test, the moment that would determine whether she would continue to lead or whether Gregory would succeed in taking everything she had worked for. The vote was called, and one by one, the board members cast their ballots. Emily's pulse quickened as she waited. She had no idea what the outcome would be, but she knew that the odds were against her. There were too many powerful people in that room, too many who had already decided that she wasn't the right fit. But when the votes were tallied, Emily was shocked. The vote had been split down the middle, with one final vote remaining, the deciding vote. "Mr. Westbrook," the board chairman said, "you are the final vote. You have the power to determine the future of this company." Gregory's eyes gleamed with triumph. He knew this was his moment. He was about to take control. But then, to everyone's surprise, he stood up and turned toward Emily. "I've been playing this game for a long time," Gregory said, his voice soft but filled with a quiet menace. "And I've won every time." He looked around the room, his gaze lingering on the board members, before settling back on Emily. "But today," he said, his voice almost a whisper, "I think it's time for a change." With those words, he cast his vote. Emily Blackwood will remain the CEO of this airline. The room fell into stunned silence. The tension was thick, and for a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. Gregory, the man who had tried to take everything from her, had just handed her the victory. Emily stood there, stunned, her mind racing. She had won. She had kept her company, kept her legacy. But this victory was more than just a business triumph, it was a personal one. She had faced her fears, confronted her doubts, and had come out on top. Gregory's face was unreadable as he sat back down, but Emily could see the anger simmering beneath the surface. He had been bested, outmaneuvered by someone he had underestimated. But she wasn't done. This wasn't just about winning a vote. It was about what came next. It was about building the airline, about making it stronger, more innovative, and more successful than ever before. The meeting concluded, and Emily stood before the board, her heart racing with excitement and relief. She had won. But more than that, she had proven something to herself. She was capable. She was strong. She was a leader. As she walked out of the boardroom, Victor gave her a nod of approval. "You did it," he said. Emily smiled, a sense of pride filling her chest. "We did it," she corrected. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time in weeks, Emily felt a sense of peace. She had proven herself, and she had a future to build. It was only the beginning.